Welcome to this edition of Security and Compliance Weekly. On our show today, we're going to play with your mind, or maybe teach you some ways not to fall for mind tricks. Whatever the takeaway, we're taking a deep dive into the art, science, and perhaps voodoo magic called social engineering. Leading us on this journey today is Perry Carpenter. He's an author, speaker, podcaster, self-described security behavior alchemist, and deceptionologist, and he's also chief evangelist and strategy officer for KnowBe4. It's sure to be a mind-blowing conversation, so join us as we continue our journey of tearing down silos and building bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly. Some things are best kept secret. You wouldn't send your company's financial data through the mail on a postcard. Then why would you let your employees use insecure collaboration and file share tools to share sensitive business information? Introducing Crossclave, a file sharing and collaboration solution built secure from the ground up. Think Signal, only designed specifically for business and enterprise users. Crossclave uses blockchain technology and end-to-end encryption to deliver a true zero-trust system designed to protect you and your business's most valuable data. So if you need to share sensitive information, SpiderOak's Crossclave is your only choice. Go to securityweekly.com/SpiderOak and get a free account with 5 gigabytes of storage.
Welcome to episode 90 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on October 12th, 2021. It's October 12th and the leaves are still green and everybody's talking about it, so I don't know what's going on. It must be that global warming thing. I am your host, of course, Mr. Jeff Mann, and joining me today are my fabulous, fresh in the more full-time chair co-hosts, Ms. Kat Valentine and Mr. Flea, but his mama calls him Frederick Lee. How's it going, everyone?
Really good. Just chilling.
Glad you guys are here and joining us today. How are things on the West Coast? Do leaves even turn on the West Coast, by the way?
Yeah, they just turn more expensive, though.
Yep.
Hey, I have a few announcements before we kick it off today. InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's event. Hear from Robert Herjavec from Shark Tank, plus heads of security like Kathy Lanier from the NFL, Hope Goins from the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on Homeland Security, Juliet Okafor from Revolution Cyber, and Tim Callahan from AFLAC. Many, many more. Plus, Security Weekly listeners save 20% on Digital Pass registration. You can get that benefit from going to securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 and register today. Also, don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. You get to all of it. Your path to Security Weekly starts at securityweekly.com/subscribe, where you can sign up for our podcast feeds, find episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can join our mailing list, the Discord server, the Twitch server, all of that stuff. Alrighty, enough of that. Our guest today, as mentioned in the show opener, is Perry Carpenter, who is a self-described security behavior alchemist and deceptionologist. And we're probably going to ask him why he calls himself that. He's also author of a book, let me take a deep breath, Transformational Security Awareness, What Neuroscientists, Storytellers, and Marketers Can Teach Us About Driving Secure Behaviors. Whew. There's a lot in there, a lot of big words. Perry, welcome to Security and Compliance Weekly.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we are looking forward to this conversation today, and frankly, let's doing a deep dive on social engineering. But hopefully, we'll cover some of the pros and cons. And I know I'm a naysayer, so We'll get to that eventually. Before we jump into the conversation, though, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into cybersecurity, if we assume for a moment that social engineering has a role in cybersecurity, and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so it was a long, windy road. I think, like it is for a lot of folks. Very few of us that are at our age in this kind of started out as cybersecurity folks. So I had a degree in biblical languages and a degree in philosophy, and didn't know what to do with myself. So I started to go to law school. Realized that I absolutely hate that as a life, and dropped out and went into to start getting a master's degree in computing, because I had always loved computers and they had fascinated me. And there was a lot of new emerging things going on at the time. This is a long time ago. And ultimately got into programming, started doing a lot of interesting things, worked on a team in art and research and development for a transportation company. We wrote a satellite email program for the trucks. We did some automated fueling things that economized the way that fuel and routing worked for logistics purposes, and so on. And then ultimately got hired by Walmart to write the email system that they used in their stores and clubs for several years. As part of, when you get into email, you start then also thinking about things like group structures. And I was also on the team that did the NT4 to Active Directory migration. So then you're dealing with groups and LDAP and all security and permissions and everything else. And that led me into security. So then my programming focus started to shift over into security types of tasks, the things that I studied related to security, and I just got hooked. And based on that, started to continue to grow my career. But one of the things that I found is that regardless of the things that we tend to do from the technology side of security, there's always this other component. There's this other thing that comes in that can mess everything up, and that is the human. That's you and I. And so alongside of all the other security topics that I had focused on for years, I started to add the human psychology piece of this and the human behavior piece of this, and see that as a critical layer. Ultimately ended up going to Gartner Research and doing a lot of critical research around not only technology sides of security, but also the behavior side, and then ultimately landed here at KnowBe4, where I focus really specifically on the human behavior side and thinking about things like social engineering and remediation steps and awareness and behavior and culture. That was a long-winded answer to your question.
Well, that's what happens when we're older and have been in the community for a while, to appreciate the summary of your experience. And certainly I agree with you that, first starting out, when you started out, as an older person like we are, there is no clear path to cybersecurity training, education, anything like that. It's we all stumbled into it one way or the other. Fascinating that you went from email security. I almost feel like we should do a poll of how many people have at one point or another worked, for or directly or as a contractor for Walmart, because that seems to be a path of convergence for a lot of us too. We like to also ask our guests sort of a level setting question. We are a show that attempts to focus not only on security, but also on compliance and the weird way that they do or don't play together. So we ask what we simply call our hot seat question, which is, where do you fall on what we like to call the security versus compliance continuum?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good and intricate question. I can see why you call that a hot seat question. I believe that if you are doing security properly, that many of the things that compliance aims to fix will be fixed, but they might not be fixed in the way that a compliance mandate requires them. On the converse side, I know lots of people that have, lots of organizations that have checked certain compliance boxes that can still get owned by anybody that is really out there with a vendetta against them. The idea with compliance is that you set a bar, everybody hits that bar, and that bar means that at least you have some certain level of resilience against things. But what we see is that either people intentionally or unintentionally find ways to check boxes that don't meet the intent of a certain regulation or compliance standard. And certain auditors and regulators aren't as effective as they could be in actually testing that, whether somebody's hit that bar or not. And so that's, I don't really fall on any side, but I would tend to say that compliance for the sake of compliance almost never gets us anywhere. But somebody with a real mindset for security that is out for the sake of security can start to build some real resilience.
Yeah,
Does that answer that question?
There is a real human component, I would say, to security and compliance as well, which is you're the internal compliance or security person, and you got to convince all these different engineers, developers, etc., to stop doing things that the insecure way, and to maybe work with you. So maybe that's something we could get into today too. Like, let me know your Jedi mind trick ways to get companies to do the right things.
Lee, you had something to say?
Yeah, I mean,
no.
Go ahead.
Oh no, it was similar to Kat. Like, one of the things I love when we talk about social engineering is, obviously there's this idea of the negative aspects of like somebody actually being exploited. But I'm really curious also to maybe we can touch a little bit about some of the positive aspects. Are there things we can actually learn that we can also utilize these skills to, change behavior in a positive way?
Yeah, I think so. So if we're moving away from the security versus compliance discussion and getting straight into social engineering and or the way that our minds work, then there are definite things that we can learn from social engineers or people that use that skill set. And there are things that we can apply from all of the social science disciplines that start to move behavior into the realm of where we want it to be. So let me start off with a foundational statement, because ultimately what we're getting to when we talk about influencing people for the sake of security, we're getting into quote unquote what people call security awareness. And I think that over the past couple decades, the industry has not done itself any favors in many of the ways that it's tried to approach security awareness. And so one of the things that I mention in my book right up front is I use security awareness in the title, but I'm actually not talking about security awareness. I use security awareness because that's the phrase that people have been conditioned to type into Google whenever they're trying to figure out how to change people's perceptions and behavior. And so my foundational statement that I make is that security awareness and secure behavior are two different things. And what the industry has tried to do is make the assumption that if we just throw enough information at people, that they will naturally catch that information in their mind, process it, create a value system around it, and then let behavior flow because of that. And if you've been a human longer than a couple years, you know that that's not how things really work. We don't just get information and then change our behavior based on that. If we did, just telling our kids that they need to have their room cleaned by 3 would automatically make that happen, and it doesn't. Or telling people that if they eat this certain food, that it's not going to have great health benefits, and if that really worked, then they would just naturally change their behavior. Or smoking causes cancer. If that information just naturally would filter in and affect our value structure and our beliefs and then everything else, then it would naturally change behavior. But for some reason, we got it in our head that from a security perspective, we should just be able to tell people a policy statement or about a threat and it reflects in behavior. Not so much. And so anytime we're thinking about security awareness, we're dealing with what I call a knowledge, intention, behavior gap. I need to, I know something. That doesn't necessarily mean that I intend to act on it. And even if I intend to act on it, that behavior may not flow. Ask anybody that's done a New Year's resolution list and said, I want to eat less, I want to go to the gym more, I want to spend less money, I want to spend more time with my family. travel more, do things for my future self. We have the knowledge. We may even have the intention to act on that at some point, but short-term payoffs always tend to unseat the longer-term intention to do things. And security is the same thing. And I'll end off with what I call my 3 realities of security awareness, and then we can get into maybe some of the fine points of how these play out. Out of this knowledge, intention, behavior gap flow 3 realities. Number 1, just because I'm aware doesn't mean that I care. Number 2, if we try to work against human nature, we will fail. And number 3, what our employees do is way more important than what they know. And I'll follow that up with a quick proof of that. Knowledge alone has never stopped a breach. It's what somebody does in the moment that allows the breach to happen or stops it. Because I can have all the right knowledge in the world and still do the wrong thing. I can click on the link or let somebody through the door into the server room or something else, or give away information on a pretexting phone call. Or I might not even know why I'm doing the thing that I'm doing. It's just my natural behavior, and I could unintentionally stop a breach. And so this knowledge component that we've put so much weight and faith in over decades is maybe one of the things that, yes, we need to consider, but we need to deprioritize, and we need to think about the way that humans actually behave from a psychological perspective or a behavior design perspective and focus on that for a while.
That's
I love that intro.
That is a great intro. It's a fascinating spin on it. I was going to start off by just simply saying I don't get social engineering, especially from those that just slap it on as part of a pen testing, red teaming exercise. Many moons ago, I used to do pen testing, and we would occasionally be asked to do that element of it, and I always thought it was kind of silly because it works. And it's testing your ability to outsmart or outwit or effectively lie to your customer. Why not just skip to the solution and save a little bit money or invest your money in a little bit more cost effective manner? Is it fun? Yeah. Does it make for great stories? Yeah. But ultimately, I don't think it does any good. Are you going to fire your employees when they do something dumb, or are you going to train them and try to rehabilitate them? So, enough said about that. Unless you'd like to comment on it, I'm fascinated to take up the understanding of human
I'll give some
behavior.
comments, not in an argumentative way, but let me flesh out some context, maybe.
Okay.
And then we can talk about whether the context is relevant to the way that you view it. The way that you talked about it, I would absolutely agree, is going to be ineffective. So if you're doing a normal engagement, whatever that is, let's say you're trying to do all the right things from an awareness perspective, and then once a year you say, let's try a social engineering engagement. Well, I'll go back to my gym scenario. If the only time you ever went to the gym was once a year, and then you tried to work out in a very sophisticated way, the only thing you're accomplishing is really realizing how pathetic you are. But if you do little bits of exercise over days, weeks, months, and years, then you start to build up actual muscle tone. You start to build certain reflexes. You build better connective tissue. You build a lot of these things. So the way that I think about social engineering and learning in general is, here's a pithy phrase alert. At all times, you're either building strength or you're allowing atrophy. And so if you're only doing phishing testing once a year or once a quarter, the only thing you're effectively doing is taking a baseline and realizing how much it hurts. But if you have a continuous program that is adapting and starting to let people, not for the sake of shaming them or doing anything that makes them feel bad or tricking them or laughing at them or anything else, but if you start letting people fail safely and then redirecting to some kind of training, Ultimately, what you're doing is you're starting to build the right muscle memory and you're building the right patterns so that people can start to recognize that. So that in the event when the real phishing email lands in their inbox, they're much better prepared than if they had received no training. So that's the way that I tend to approach it. It is the building of resilience over time, not just the quick hit, let's see how bad everybody is. Because in the beginning, like you said, everybody's going to be bad. The other thing I see done wrong with this is some organizations will continue to test using the same phishing template or the same type of template. And what that does is it gives them a false sense of security, because maybe you say, all right, we're gonna send out phishing emails that use bad logos and misspellings and have an obvious link or something like that in it. And then they get their phishing click rate down to under 2%, and they're like, man, we're doing awesome with this. But then they get hit with a business email compromise, or they get hit with a document download or something that uses a different psychological trigger. And again, they realize how pathetic they are because they've not been going across a spectrum and they've not been doing that the way a real cyber criminal would.
There's so many directions I want to go right now. Go ahead, Kat.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say thanks, Perry. I actually feel a little bit better. I come from a technical training background originally. It's one of the many roles, I guess. So I learned a lot about the psychology of it, and I kind of try to integrate that with security awareness workshops instead of like just a Zoom where I talk at you kind of thing. But I take the approach of different humans learn things differently, and you kind of have to give them bite-sized chunks, right? So, for example, excluding phishing, because I think that this could like apply to a lot of different things. I will have in this workshop them actually do a thing, like put their work email into haveibeenpwned.com versus their personal email, and see how many breaches they've been in, and it's kind of a it kind of opens their eyes and helps me out quite a bit when it comes to having those political discussions with the C-levels, because they attend as well. And it starts opening their mind to all sorts of different things. So that's just one example, but I think you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I think putting somebody in a different mental space than they're normally in has value, right? Because at that point, you're able to build different neural pathways. You're able to make a point hit a little bit differently, which is why I'm always in favor of, if you can ever find a safe way to let somebody enter the mind of an attacker, and say, what would it be like to try to phish your coworker right now? What psychological levers would you use? How would you craft the email? Because all of a sudden, once they start to view it that way, rather than let me defend myself against this thing that landed in my inbox, now they view potentially every email a little bit more differently because they've had to take on that mindset for a minute. And that, a little 5-minute exercise like that, where they're taking on a different persona, can change somebody's outlook on life.
So I want to jump in. I was trying to make a choice. Let's talk about security awareness training and sort of real briefly the history of that. Now, I grew up in a DoD organization where there was always some multiple forms of security awareness training, usually, little pithy messages when you would log in, once we had computers, when we would log in, message of the day. Certainly there was this idea of security awareness posters. That was very popular. Particular organization I worked for used to, I think, violate copyright up one side and down the other with, recognizable faces, movie stars, cartoons, and stuff like that. But, in the early days of my commercial consulting in the private sector 25 years ago, and frankly, I'll say it and get it out now, with the advent of PCI, the idea of security awareness being a regular thing and being done with multiple methods has been around for a long time. Yet, most organizations would sort of look for the the least expensive, least interruptive, do a 20-minute video once a year type of thing, and pay as little as they could, pass a quiz or something like that. They seem to struggle with the multiple methods. And frankly, the awareness training back in 15, 20 years ago was all about how do you pick a strong password. I mean, for years it was how do you pick strong passwords. In the last couple of years, it's shifted to the whole phishing email, how to prevent being phished campaign. I mean, phishing's been around almost as long as I have. That it's not a new concept. Granted, it's probably a more productive, lucrative attack technique these days. But any thoughts on sort of the evolution or devolution of security awareness, depending on your perspective, Perry?
Yeah. I think, like you said, people have been aware that multiple methods and taking a more multi-channel, long-term approach to awareness has been that's the way that's actually going to potentially start to influence people's thinking patterns more. But the barrier that a good security awareness program manager is going to come up against whenever they suggest that is somebody going, well, I would rather knock this out all at once for my employees, or aren't we taking more time and more attention, and what's the ROI on this? So you always end up in those discussions. I would say if we're talking about this last evolution, which is focusing more on things like phishing and social engineering, the gift that the cyber criminals have given security awareness program managers is the revelation that as Sands and others point out, 85% plus of the breaches that are happening are coming through some kind of social engineering or human error. And so that means that regardless of all the great things that we've done on the technology side and all the strength that we've built around all these other layers of technology, ultimately what we've been doing on the human side has not been as effective as it could be. So that means that we do need to start to evolve the way that we're thinking around it. And think about, if you remember my rule number 2, which is if we try to work against human nature, we will fail. We know that if we try to shoehorn in everything once a year, that there is this concept called the decay of learning, which means I'm not going to remember much of that an hour after I get out of it. And I'm going to remember way less than that a day after I get out. And by the time I actually need to apply any of the principles that I learned in this security awareness training that lasted 2 hours and I just kind of click through, by the time any of that is relevant to me, it's probably going to be months from the time that I do need to change my password or do something else. So we need to start to figure out how to get the actual thing that we want to train somebody on, the training for that, as close to the point of actual behavior as possible, so that somebody's natural motivation to engage in the training is a little bit higher, and they feel the need to, they feel the relevance a little bit more. And maybe at the time, if this is an uncommon, weird behavior that we're asking somebody to do, something that doesn't feel as natural, that just, because of the fact that they've been exposed to that information a little bit closer to the time of behavior, it won't feel as unnatural. It won't feel as new. And so we can start to shift that. The other thing that we have to realize is that if people are having to, contort themselves around this, way that we've decided that they need to do something, whether that's password management or whether that's sending an encrypted document or something else, if they have to contort themselves around that and do a lot of cognitive energy spending to accomplish that, then they are naturally going to try to work around it rather than to do something else. They're going to go with the easiest thing that they can accomplish, which might bypass your technology controls because you haven't locked them down as much, or because the technology doesn't account for that type of bypass. So ultimately, the thing that is starting to come to roost right now is that people are realizing that we've been approaching this in a way that's incomplete for several years, and working with human nature, finding the right technology that encourages the behavior that we want, putting in policies that encourage the behavior that we want, putting in procedures that make this feel natural, and doing things in a way that is naturally going to not feel like an impediment for the end user, but ultimately, just kind of naturally channel them into the most secure behavior. That's going to lead to the best long-term result.
Yeah, and I think that, to your point, and especially with the training aspect, I try to make it memorable, right? So I'll actually, if I've got one shot at it, because some people can't advocate across a big enterprise, right, for more than once a year. They can't. Maybe they can do it in different engineering groups and target those different groups. But if I've got one shot for that year, I want it to be memorable. And so what I'll tend to do is bring up pen testing stories from when I was a pen tester, and just like common things that we would do. Quick example being just to, and it's very crafted to get the audience to not do those things and to realize, wow, that really is pretty easy. An example of that is, hey, listen, as a pen tester, every time, and this is true, every time, these compliance regiments say, hey, you need to have 8 characters, you need to change it every 90 days, et cetera, which actually weakens that stuff, right? And so what I'll tell them is, hey, listen, when I was a pen tester, one of the things we would do to you guys is we would take your company name, Acme Inc., fall, the year, and an exclamation point, and every single time we would run various scripts, and then I'd show them where those scripts are if they wanted to try it themselves. We would get at least 2 hits with that as a password. And my hope in that is the audience member is sitting there going, oh crap, I do totally do that. You know what I mean? But practically, like, what could we do? Things like that. What could we do as practitioners to kind of get these messages across, make it a bit more memorable, and really train the mind a bit?
Yeah, there's a few things. So I'll tee off something that Jeff said, and then get straight into your question. So Jeff was talking about putting out posters or having the security message of the day that comes up that he's seen in former employers. All of that is good and okay from a multi-channel communication perspective, but all of those will also become psychologically invisible to somebody over time, because we all suffer from this. Fact that there's a lot of noise coming in to us. We're inundated with lots and lots of noise. So signal to noise ratio gets really, really difficult to deal with. The same way that if you saw a brand new billboard pop up as you were driving to work, you may actually notice that. A couple days later, you're effectively blind to it. Same thing with things that may pop up in our office environment. The first time it's there, you might notice it. A few days later, you're effectively blind to it. So the only way to continue to capture attention is to continue to change the way that we're prompting for that attention or trying to capture it. So I'll leave that there, and then I'll go to your question now, which was around ways to capture somebody's attention and to grab emotion and to make people really retain things. I talk about in my book what I call 4 Trojan horses for the mind. You hit on one of those, which was story. Great stories. Our minds are designed to think and retain story because we infuse that with reality. We're going to remember stories way more than we remember stats,
right?
Because we add all of this rich context to it. So the 4 Trojan horses that I mentioned are images. So anytime we can use an image, somebody's face, a landscape, something else, it brings richness because we are extremely visual creatures. Even if you just use words to talk about imagery, say I saw this lush landscape. There were these really, really deep greens, and I saw this huge oak coming up, bigger than any tree that I've ever seen. All of a sudden, your mind starts to engage differently. So images, sounds. And, if you're just speaking to somebody, that may be the way that you use your voice. But if you're creating a podcast, it might be the way that you use music to try to invoke an emotion. It might be the way that you use a sound effect to key that this is an important point. So images, sounds, emotion, I think, is its own Trojan horse. You could use fear. That's going to make the mind react different than something like excitement. That's going to make the mind react something like different than seeing somebody that's sad, about something that's happened to them. So you can use all of that very, very intentionally. And then the last one is the words you choose and the stories that you use. So those are the ways. Anytime you can get away from bare bones information and stats and move to something that works much more with the way that our minds actually store and retain information and learn to care about things, the better off we're going to be. Trying to remember, there was
let me jump in here.
Yeah.
Sorry, Perry. Let me jump in with sound to say we need to take a quick break so that we can share some images and stories with our listeners, and we'll be right back. None of us want to take a break. This is fascinating, but we will now. So, Johnny, take us out, and we'll be right back.